Welcome in, everybody, to the first video of the 2025 fantasy football season with lessons learned from the first week of NFL football from a Dynasty fantasy football perspective. This year is going to be a little bit different. Last year, I took like one takeaway from every single game and every single team. I'm not going to do that. I am going to go through every single team, every single game, but I'm just going to give more of my broad perspective on everybody that kind of played, whether it's positive or negative, or some of these guys are just so good that it just doesn't matter. Congratulations if you have them, sort of thing, you know? So we're just going to go through game by game, and I'm going to discuss kind of each individual team. I am going to show like the ESPN box score. I promise you I'm not just box score hunting for a lot of this. I do, go back and watch some of the film. I dive into a lot of what other people are saying, like, film-wise from Twitter and whatnot. And then I also have, my notes off to the side here of things that I specifically want to talk about with some of these players. And I will say whether or not some of these guys are buys or sells or holds. I will say for week one, I'm trying not to be too overreactionary. I know a lot of people can get really weird about week one because it's the first week of seeing all these guys and you feel like your takes are either completely wrong or completely right. There's no room for it to be in the middle when most likely a lot of this stuff is in the middle. So I'm not overreacting to bad performances. I'm not overreacting to fantastic performances that we didn't see coming, and unless it really is something that I believe is kind of more of a signal underlying of the regular box score kind of thing. So I know I've had people already DM me, should I be panicking on this guy? Should I be worried about this? Should I be, concerned, blah, 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 blah. I ain't doing any of that. Week one is just kind of about laying the foundation for the season, understanding where some of these teams might be trending towards either positively or negatively, identifying, good or bad defenses, good or bad offenses, roles, usage, all that kind of stuff. So I'm not really trying to overreact to a lot of things. I just want to get a good lay of the land for how 2025 could end up shaping out. So then we can make smarter decisions in the future, by the end of the month or the start of October, or, as we get more into weeks 8, 9, 10, 11, to actually make really good buys or sells. Not to say that you can't buy or sell before then. I do have players that I am looking to specifically buy right now off of week one, but I'm trying not to overreact to a lot of this stuff. So, left talking, let's get right into it. Our first matchup was, of course, the Thursday night game between the Dallas Cowboys and the Philadelphia Eagles. It was a fantastic game at the beginning. Then that lightning delay really snuffed the flame out of a lot of what was going on. And that, the third quarter wasn't all that great, but then the fourth quarter especially really kind of sucked, and the wind was really knocked out of everybody's sails. Of course, a lot of people, because it was the first game, you want to overreact to the Javonte Williams stuff. You want to overreact to CeeDee Lamb's, 4 or 5 drops or whatever it is. George Pickens didn't have all that much usage. Jake Ferguson kind of got involved a little bit. Dak Prescott looked good. He looked really, really good, actually, from a kind of more advanced analytic perspective, and in terms of his completion percentage and big time throws and all that kind of stuff. But his fantasy game log did not look all that great from a fantasy perspective. And then, of course, the Eagles, it was Hurts, it was Saquon, AJ Brown sucks, Dallas Goedert's going to be a phenomenal tight end, blah, 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 blah. Let's dive into the Dallas Cowboys side of this first. Dak Prescott, I think, is going to be really, really good. He's been a buy for me all offseason. He'll continue to be a buy for me right now, just in general, I think, for a first plus kind of a thing. If you need another quarterback too that has quarterback one upside, stuff like that. I'm not really concerned about this. The Philadelphia Eagles defense is really good, even without Jalen Carter hawk-tooing on Dak at the beginning of the game. But I think Dak's going to be really good, and this is probably going to be his worst game of the year. CeeDee Lamb, obviously phenomenal. George Pickens, I think this is going to be the play with George Pickens. It's just he's going to be an up and down kind of guy. He's now into this wide receiver 2 role that we see a lot of other wide receivers kind of get inconsistent production from. You're talking about Devonta Smith, you can talk about Jaylen Waddle, T. Higgins, Jordan Addison, whoever it is. George Pickens is in this wide receiver 2 role now behind CeeDee Lamb, that CeeDee Lamb is going to get his every single week, and then Pickens is going to be fighting for kind of the rest of all of that, and whatever defensive attention he may or may not receive, depending on how they want to attack CeeDee Lamb. But I also think Pickens' presence is also really good for CeeDee Lamb, because for some reason the Eagles decided to put Quinyon Mitchell on Pickens basically all night, and then CeeDee Lamb got Adoree Jackson. No idea why that was the case. Adoree Jackson is hot garbage. I would have flipped it personally, but that's kind of the give and take with CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens, to where Lamb is just so good, he's going to command defensive attention, but Pickens is also really good that when, they get certain looks, or defenses also, see Pickens out on the outside and then Lamb's in the slot, they might want to adjust their defense one way or another, and it's going to be good for both of them, but probably really good for CeeDee Lamb in the long run. But they're great. Jake Ferguson, I think, is just a solid tight end. Nothing really else to talk about there from the Dallas Cowboys perspective from the receiving game. Javonte Williams, of course, he had the 2 goal line touchdowns, both 1-yard touchdowns, one of which may not even happened if CeeDee Lamb didn't have a pass interference call against him. He might have actually been able to bring that touchdown down. But then Javonte, still had 50 yards and 1 touchdown and had another couple of targets, couple of receptions. This is a Javonte Williams game. I mean, if you look at the game log, 15 carries, 54 yards, 3.6 yards per carry. His longest was 11 yards. Miles Sanders actually had the big run in that game, but didn't get all that much more usage out of it. And then Javonte just fell into the end zone twice. This is probably something that might actually happen throughout the remainder of the year, or at least to where the Cowboys continue to trust Javonte Williams with this kind of workhorse role and goal line role, especially while Jaden Blue continues to be out and while Phil Maffa's on the IR. We'll see what happens whenever the rookies come back and are healthy. But if the Cowboys offense is really good, Javonte probably has touchdown opportunities that, I think about like Zeke Elliott from a few years ago. I think about, Jamal Williams or David Montgomery's like massive touchdown seasons and stuff with the Lions, like kind of like something like that, like Damian Harris from 2021 with the New England Patriots. That's where I think Javonte could kind of make a lot of his fantasy production, is through the touchdown game. And because this offense is probably going to be pretty good, they are going to be, he's going to have touchdown opportunities pretty much every single week. So I think he's a fine flex option. I'm not looking to buy him at all off of this performance, thinking that it's indicative of him being like this sleeper running back for the remainder of the year. I honestly shade towards him being more of a sell off of this performance, just because I don't think you could have gotten a second round pick prior to this week, but now I think you probably could have gotten a second round pick. So if you are a team that just had Javonte on the bench, or you are a rebuilder hoping for something like this to happen, if you still have Javonte, and you're able to get a second round pick now, take the second round pick and then figure out something with your running backs later. Or Javonte, like I said, if you're a contender, Javonte probably is more of a depth piece that you might not have even started last night or this week. And if you can get a second round pick for a bench player on your team that doesn't impact your starting lineup, absolute win. From the Eagles standpoint, Jalen Hurts is phenomenal. Saquon Barkley is still really good. I mean, he only had 60 yards, but he had 4 receptions. 4 receptions you love to see, because he didn't have that receiving workload last year. And I think that was just kind of how the game script ended up going for the Eagles, why they shied away from their wide receivers and why they went more towards Dallas Goedert and then Saquon Barkley. I saw that Dallas actually played zone, I think it was zone cover 3 defense like 100% of the time. Like literally every single defensive play was a zone defense that was more cover 3. And that kind of nixed A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith out of the game plan. A.J. Brown is phenomenal against man coverage. Not to say he's not good against zone, but I think just because of how the zone defenses were playing for Dallas on Thursday night, that it just lent itself to those more short area passes to Dallas Goedert, to Saquon Barkley out of the flat. They were able to take advantage with Jahan Dotson on that big 50-yard play. But then Jalen Hurts can also make a lot of stuff with his own legs, So that I think is just kind of the game plan. I do think A.J. Brown is still like a good buy. I would probably not pay a first round pick, because I do think that this game, and this has been the case for the past couple of years, but especially last year with Saquon Barkley, and then now again this year with Saquon Barkley, is that there's just going to be games where they don't need him. So his ceiling is still really high on a weekly basis, but if you don't need him every single week, you're going to get these kind of pitfall games that might end up costing you a week, or you're going to have to try to, scramble back by playing higher upside flex guys or something like that, and then hoping for something better to happen outside of AJ Brown. So I don't think I would pay like a first or a first plus for AJ Brown. I have cooled on that since the offseason. But if you can pay a second or a second plus, multiple seconds, whatever it ends up being. I know in the Discord chat for the DLF YouTube channel, we were discussing Jaden Higgins in a second round pick for AJ Brown, which I would lean towards the AJ Brown side on that one, as a contender. So something like that, I think is still good moves for AJ Brown, because he's obviously not going to have one target every single game for the remainder of the year. And most oftentimes, whenever he does have a bad game, even whether it was with Philly or Tennessee, he usually comes back and has some pretty good games after that. So I would expect, as Philadelphia continues to move on, especially because they play Kansas City this week, it would not shock me if they have to throw a little bit more, because Kansas City's rush defense is just so freaking good that AJ Brown might be needed a little bit more this week. So I would not be shocked if AJ Brown had 15 plus PPR fantasy points this week, scored a touchdown, had a couple long bombs. Maybe the hamstring injury is a little bit worse than what was initially thought by him not being on the injury report. Maybe it was the Dallas defense is actually pretty good. They had Trayvon Diggs on him a lot of the night. So it could have been a big combination of the Eagles didn't need him. The Cowboys are a good defense, and the Cowboys also kind of schemed him out by playing a lot of zone. So it might have just been a perfect storm to where he only had one catch for 8 yards. But I'm not concerned about it from fantasy, and I do lean towards him being a buy. The other fact is the fact that Devonta Smith only had 3 for 16. So if this was something where like Devonta Smith had 8 for 100 and a touchdown and got all that usage, and then AJ Brown didn't, I might be a little bit more concerned. But I think this is because of the fact that, when you look at AJ Brown and Devonta Smith, and even Jahan Dotson only had 3 targets, he just had a 50-yard catch. They didn't use wide receivers at all. So I think that's just more of a game plan thing. And maybe for AJ Brown specifically, it is a little bit more of a hamstring thing. But that's pretty much the Eagles and the Cowboys. Now, Friday night game in Brazil, Kansas City Chiefs and the LA Chargers. This game was really, really fun to watch. And of course, there's a lot of takeaways here. I want to start with the LA Chargers side of this, because I think that it's a little bit shorter and a lot more exciting, is because Justin Herbert, the passing rate for the LA Chargers that we saw basically from midseason on last year, and then what we saw again this year, was phenomenal. And if they really let Justin Herbert, they take the reins off of him and they let him loose, he can do stuff like this. This is probably the most amazing thing that could possibly have happened for the LA Chargers offense, because there's so many players here that can produce for fantasy football that all just hinge upon the fact that they just need to be allowed to throw. And Justin Herbert, can absolutely make anything happen. The fact that he even ran 7 for 32 is phenomenal as well, to give you a little bit of a floor boost. And then if he finds the end zone throughout the year, maybe 4, 5, 6 times, that's even better for Justin Herbert specifically. 318-3, you love to see that. Quentin Johnston was great. Ladd McConkey was pretty good. Keenan Allen was great. All 3 of those guys, I think, are very viable plays every single week. Ladd McConkey, I'm buying. Keenan Allen, I'm buying. Quentin Johnston, I'm still a little iffy on, just because I think that his role and his usage is kind of a little weird. He is more of like the wide receiver 3 technically on this team, but he can have games like this. But then I also think that he can have games that are like, 2 for 30, and that's just basically it, because McConkey got it or Keenan Allen got it. But because of McConkey and Keenan Allen's presence, and because of the fact that Justin Herbert is just that good, I do think Quentin Johnston is a weekly flex consideration that is not really a terrible buy right now. I personally am not advising to buy him, but I don't think that he's a bad buy if you get him in kind of a package deal. The real buy candidate for the LA Chargers is Keenan Allen as a contender. I think Keenan Allen is pretty freaking good. Obviously, he was phenomenal last year with Chicago, and then he just kept looking so good Friday night back in the Powder Blues. It's such a shame that he spent that 1 year in Chicago, because he should have been a perennial LA Charger, and they should have just made that work. Anyway, that's just me, the Keenan Allen fan. As a contender, I would pay, if you need wide receiver help, I would pay a late second for Keenan Allen. He's going to be phenomenal this year. He does and does not hurt Ladd McConkey. Like, Ladd still had 6 for 74, 9 targets himself. Those two are the wide receiver 1 and the wide receiver 2. I think they can both play inside, outside, whatever it is. I think it does hurt Ladd's ultimate ceiling, but I don't think they really vulture each other as much as a lot of people were kind of concerned about. I think that they're both just going to be really good, and especially because that all flows down from the fact that Justin Herbert is really good, and they're going to let him throw the ball, or at least that's what the hope is here from week 1, is that they should continue to let Justin Herbert throw the ball, because good things happen. On the Omarion Hampton standpoint, that usage is phenomenal. I saw a lot of people being like, I didn't like Omarion Hampton's blah, blah, blah. He wasn't all that efficient. 17 touches to Najee's 2. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that you can get any better than that. The Kansas City Chiefs defense, #1 against running backs last year. We knew that coming in. Chris Jones is really good. He disrupts every single play, but the handful of plays that he didn't disrupt, those were the plays that Omarion Hampton was able to get into, the second level. That was his 11-yard rush, his 8-yard rushes, his 7-yard rush were the plays that Chris Jones did not make an impact on. But all the other ones that Omarion was stuffed on the goal line, or stuffed on the line of scrimmage, those were Chris Jones plays. And because not every team has a Chris Jones, that's why they were #1 in defense against running backs. Omarion Hampton will have good and really good games and then better days ahead from a fantasy football standpoint, especially if he's getting 17 touches every single week. I do think that his ceiling is a little bit capped because he's not getting the receiving workload. I mean, we kind of knew that coming in. Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh are not heavily targeting running backs on their offense. That just might be a Justin Herbert thing. But if we can get Omarion Hampton into the 40s, I think that's pretty good. Like, if 2 catches every single week for 17 games, that's 34 receptions. So if we get a couple games where he has 3 or 4, maybe a 5er in there somewhere, like if we can get him into the 40s on top of having 250 carries, that's going to be a really, really good opportunity for a top 10 fantasy running back. And he's, that usage is phenomenal. Snap counts, phenomenal. All that stuff from Omarion Hampton was fantastic to see. If anybody's panicking about it, sure, buy, but I don't think anybody really is from a dynasty standpoint because he was a heavily drafted rookie. But I think it's the trend line for Omarion Hampton is up, not stagnant or down or anything. I think he's phenomenal. The last thing I wanted to say about the Chargers is that I think the fact that their offense was able to do that without any help at all from either their rookie wide receivers in Trey Harris or Keandre Lambert-Smith just shows you how good all the other wide receivers are, but then also shows you what could happen when Keenan Allen is no longer on the team. When, if Quentin Johnston gets hurt, we've seen him get hurt. We've seen Ladd McConkey get hurt, all that kind of stuff. So I am very interested in these rookies still. But I just think they're longer plays. That's for sure. So I still buy into both of them. I didn't have any issues with either their usage. I love that Keandre Lambert-Smith got that deep target. I think there's just a little bit of miscommunication. Trey Harris had a 1-yard catch or 11-yard catch. So the rookies are still viable long term. You might not get any real impact out of them this year without injuries. From the Chiefs side, for Patrick Mahomes, they let him throw, so I love to see that. Hopefully that we get back to the Kansas City Chiefs kind of throwing. I think it was a little bit matchup based because they were like immediately down to start the game. But it is good to see that they at least can let Patrick Mahomes throw again. 258-1, you would like to see that be better, but he lost Xavier Worthy immediately at the start of the game, and he didn't have Rashee Rice, obviously. The funniest joke that I saw on Twitter of the week related to Xavier Worthy, it was somebody said when he was told that Xavier Worthy was going to get the Rashee Rice role, he thought that meant that he was going to produce like how Rashee Rice did, not that Xavier Worthy would be the sacrificial wide receiver injured by his own teammate at the very beginning of the year role. So the joke was obviously a lot better. I butchered the crap out of that. But reading it that night, that joke was really funny. So obviously in Xavier Worthy's place, Hollywood Brown 10 for 99 on 16 targets. Juju got a little bit of work. Kelsey caught the long touchdown. Tyquan Thornton had, multiple deep shot passes, only connected on really 2 of them. Or I guess one of them he had a 38-yard long and the other one was a whatever. Hollywood, I think if you had Hollywood and you stashed him, you found yourself a nice, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 kind of flex option. I would be trying to sell Hollywood off of this because we know that he's not going to have this usage every single week, especially when Worthy comes back and Rashee Rice comes back. So if you're able to sell right now, I think that's a positive for you. But if you just want to ride the usage and ride the production, I'm totally fine with that as well. Juju, if you can pick him up off of waivers, Kelsey should be fine moving forward. I mean, I don't think you're going to bench Travis Kelsey, but his role just might be a little bit weird. And I do think the Chargers, most teams know to kind of scheme Kelsey out of games. The Chargers specifically as a divisional opponent. The biggest conversation, I think, from the Kansas City side is the running backs. I mean, Pacheco and Kareem Hunt both had 5. They both kind of got phased out of the game pretty early because they were down a lot. Pacheco got 2 catches. Kareem Hunt had 2 catches. So they were 7-7 the whole entire way. Kareem Hunt was a little bit better in the receiving game. Pacheco, a little bit better in the rush game. And you definitely notice that when you watch both of them. I'm not selling Isaiah Pacheco. I do still have hope for him long term. I do also hope that they get Brashard Smith integrated because I think that he could add a little bit of juice to this backfield and is better than Kareem Hunt. So I'm hoping that Brashard Smith gets in there. Sell Kareem Hunt for anything. His time is coming to an end very, very soon. So sell Kareem Hunt as quickly as you possibly can for literally anything. A third, fourth, couple fourths, whatever it is. Fab. Sell Kareem Hunt. And hold on to Isaiah Pacheco. I'm not buying Isaiah Pacheco. I'm not selling him either. I'm just holding him because I think there will be better days ahead. He averaged 5 yards per carry. And I think he's going to be fine, especially as he gets more and more removed from the injury at the beginning of last year. So it's been a full calendar year basically since his injury. So give him a little bit more time, like we did with Tony Pollard, like we did with Mark Andrews. By I think mid-October or mid to late October into November, I think Pacheco could be doing a lot better. So I'm not buying him, not selling him. Solid hold. But you need to bench him. Don't start Isaiah Pacheco. All right, into these Sunday games. We'll start with this Cardinals-Saints game that was super boring in all facets, essentially. Although my buddy and I, we did kind of call this one as a trap game for Arizona. Wasn't going to be as good just because they were on the road. Then we got Kyler Murray's flu game or whatever it is. So we were right in that regard. And the Cardinals just didn't look all that great. I mean, Marv looked pretty good. He had that 45-yard catch on the sideline, caught a touchdown. So that's pretty solid. Only 6 targets, though. So he made the most of them, but it's still all the Trey McBride show. He led the team in targets, 6 for 61. In terms of the running back position, I don't love that Trey Benson was so much more efficient on the ground than James Conner. Obviously, Conner got way more work. He had 16 total touches to Trey Benson's 9. So you like to see that, especially with James Conner's receiving workload as a floor and ceiling vault. And then that was where he was able to score a touchdown. So he saved the day for you there through the receiving game. But I don't love that Trey Benson looked more efficient and had that 50-yard run and everything. I don't love that because I fear that could be a reason for Arizona to continue giving him more work and split this gap a little bit closer between Conner and Benson. So I still like Conner a lot, for the next few weeks here. They play Carolina this week, so that's an A-plus matchup based on how Jacksonville destroyed them in week 1. So that's an A-plus matchup for James Conner. Definitely continue to start him, but I'm paying attention to this. This is one of the things that I think, when we're talking about laying foundations and getting a grasp for trends, I am a little bit concerned that we could see more and more Benson as the year goes on and less James Conner. Then of course we know about James Conner's injury history. So I'm a tad I love James Conner so much. He was always a buy every single year for me for the past 3 or 4 years, especially coming into this year too. But I am just slightly concerned that this might be the year to definitely move away from him. Even as a contender, I know it's hard to sell an older veteran running back who's also still pretty productive, but it might be your last opportunity to get out from under him for any sort of value. And if you can get, a second or anything like that for Conner and then use that second in a different way to then go buy somebody else, or if Conner's more of a depth piece, kind of like Javonte was for you, you can get out from him. I'm not really opposed to those kind of ideas. Or like I said, if you just want to ride him out, you can definitely do that because I do still believe in him over the next few weeks. And hopefully he can continue staving Trey Benson off. But I am a little bit concerned with the efficiency differences between the two for the running back position. And then Kyler just, I like to see that he had 7 scrambles, 160 yards and 2 touchdowns. Ain't going to get it done. Maybe he was actually sick. Who knows? But the rest of the offense is just, it's just not, it's not inspiring. If you have Trey McBride, great. Marv is a wide receiver 2 with upside right now. I don't know how you can start Kyler with any sort of confidence. It just is what it is. The Saints aren't any better though. Spencer Rattler completed basically 50% of his passes. The only thing that saved him was the fact that he just threw 46 times. And 24 of those went to Juwan Johnson and Chris Olave. So Juwan Johnson, if this continues, this is this year's Jonnu Smith, essentially, is Juwan Johnson in his usage. He ran like a 100% route rate. He was used all over the place, had some bigger plays, PPR guy. I mean, the touchdowns aren't going to be there for the New Orleans Saints this year, and if they do, they're probably going to more likely go to Alvin Kamara. But at least from a PPR standpoint, I'm not buying Juwan Johnson because he could have just, this could be just a weird game. So I'm not buying him straight out from this game, but it could definitely be another thing that we want to pay attention to trends, pay attention to what's going on with Juwan Johnson and his usage. Chris Olave, you love to see the fact that he had 13 targets, but only had like a 50% reception percentage. Thank you, Spencer Rattler. He's a PPR kind of flex consideration. I'm not starting him with any confidence because, again, I don't think the ceiling is there and the touchdowns probably aren't there either. Shaheed, 6 for 33. Okay, cool. Kamara, you would like to see more receiving work. The touchdown saved the day. He's just another guy that is just, it's an RB2 with upside. So there's really not much else to talk about here from the New Orleans Saints. I'm really not looking to buy into anyone, but I will continue to monitor Juwan Johnson. All right, on to Colts and Dolphins. This was a really wild game for multiple reasons. The easy one here is the Dolphins offense looked garbage, like absolute garbage, which I think stems a lot from the offensive line. I don't know how much is actually McDaniel himself, but McDaniel's going to get fired at some point very, very soon if the Dolphins continue to play like this. Tua did not look good. Tyreek did not look good. Waddle did not look good. Achane saved you with the touchdown at the end, which somebody on Twitter was like, dude, it was absolutely wild that the fact it was like 4th and 11, and the play that was called was a swing route out to Achane on the 18-yard line that he then found a way to score on from 18 yards actually out, but it was actually an 11-yard touchdown. So Achane is still very good. I still think Tyreek and Waddle are good, but I'm scared that this offense is going to drag everybody down. I am very concerned about that. So I would, I'd be exploring options to trade away from Tyreek Hill. That's just an age thing as well from Dynasty. I'd be exploring options to trade away from Jaylen Waddle. If you can trade down from Devon Achane to another running back like Josh Jacobs or Chase Brown or Bucky Irving or Omarion Hampton or Travion or, anybody kind of like James Cook, anybody kind of like that. If you can trade down from Achane and pick up maybe a little extra something to do that, but you get a running back that is either going to be similarly productive or possibly even more productive if this Dolphins offense is actually that bad, I'm all for it. Tua looks rough as well. Man, I don't like having Dolphins at this point in time. So that could change over the course of the next few weeks, but at least the trajectory for them right now is very, very down. On the Colts side, complete opposite. They looked phenomenal. Daniel Jones looked really good. JT looked really good. Michael Pittman and Tyler Warren especially. So if you drafted Tyler Warren, congratulations. I had him way too low in my rookie rankings. I should have just vaulted him up and vaulted Leveland up too. But I did have Warren too low, so that's on me. JT is just Jonathan Taylor. It sucks that Daniel Jones vultured both of those rushing touchdowns, which I will say won't happen every week. So Jonathan Taylor, of course, is going to score a pretty decent amount of touchdowns, especially if this offense is really good. The other thing that you love to see for JT is that he had 3 receptions. So if we get him back into the 40 reception range, that's just going to elevate everything too. But from the touchdown specifically, obviously, if this Colts offense is actually pretty good, he'll have more scoring opportunities, and Daniel Jones won't vulture all of them. But Daniel Jones has that ability to vulture touchdowns, which might be annoying for Jonathan Taylor managers, but the ceiling is still pretty high. The floor is also pretty high for having JT. He had 12 PPR fantasy points this week, almost 13, which is pretty good for not scoring a touchdown. Now, Daniel Jones and then Michael Pittman seem like to be the main storylines here. Daniel Jones actually looks pretty good. I said in a video that's going to be coming out on the 4for4 Fantasy Football channel, talking from a redraft standpoint, that Daniel Jones looks like he could be this year's version of Sam Darnold. He's got a much better offensive line, possibly a better receiving core, like a receiving group as a whole around him than what he's had in New York. Obviously, Malik Neighbors is far and away the best talent individually, but as a group, having Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, Tyler Warren, and then Pierce and Adonai Mitchell and Jonathan Taylor out of the backfield is a very good group to have for stabilization for a quarterback on top of the much improved offensive line. and Daniel Jones looked pretty good from it, So he could be a sneaky guy that if you were looking for a quarterback, like if you had Tua, I'd probably be looking to see how I can move to Daniel Jones if you have Tua as your QB2 or QB3. Getting off of Tua right now and then moving over to a Daniel Jones who looks like he could be in line for, like I said, this year's Sam Darnold. Not to say that like I'm going ballistic on buying Daniel Jones, but I am intrigued, and I think that he's shown pretty good fantasy production in the past, even with a bad offense. So give him a potentially good offense, and we'll find out pretty quickly. They play the Patriots this week, so or no, the Dolphins play the Patriots. I forget who the Colts play. Anyway, we'll find out pretty quickly whether or not this Colts team is actually pretty good, or if this is just like them doing what the Saints did at the start of last year when they were 2-0, won both games by scoring like 80 combined points or whatever. We'll find out quickly. But I do think that I can see myself believing more in Daniel Jones in this offense than I did with the New Orleans Saints last year. As for the receiving core with Michael Pittman and Josh Downs, I am buying into Michael Pittman. I do really like this production that he had. He's the main wide receiver one still, as much as we all want it to be Josh Downs. He is still the main wide receiver one. He plays in 2 wide receiver sets, 3 wide receiver sets. Obviously, he has the historical production of multiple 1,000-yard seasons in the past. Actually, from 2021 to 2023, he was a top 20 fantasy wide receiver all 3 years. And then 2024, last year, he had that back fracture that was supposed to land him on IR, but then didn't. He played through it. So that at least is some reason for why he wasn't as productive last year, on top of the fact that he had, Anthony Richardson and whoever else throwing him the Joe Flacco last year. But I think that back fracture, obviously, if you look at 2021, 2022, 2023, and then throw 2024 in there, you can see which year. If I told you, look at those 4 years, one of those years he got hurt, you would say, okay, yeah, it's probably 2024. And so it's a very good reason for why he had lower production. But if Pittman is getting back to being more of what he was from 21 to 23 with a improved Daniel Jones on a good Colts offense, I don't see why Michael Pittman couldn't be, this year's version of like a Jacoby Myers or something like that, who's just like sneaky, consistent, all that kind of stuff. Like he had 20 PPR fantasy points, 14 if you didn't include that touchdown. If he was just 6 for 80, didn't score, 14 PPR points. I love seeing that type of production from a wide receiver. It reminds me of like Robert Woods from like 5 or 6 years ago on the Rams. So I love having wide receivers like that, and I do think Michael Pittman is a pretty solid buy if you can get him for your contender second-round pick if you need a little bit extra wide receiver help. As for Josh Downs, I am concerned because he was still relegated to pretty much 3 wide receiver sets. In this 4-for-4 video that I talked about when I talked about this kind of Colts offense and buying into Michael Pittman from a redraft standpoint and a little bit of Daniel Jones, I said that this offense and this receiving core is pretty much like the knockoff version of the Packers, where Josh Downs is Jaden Reed, Michael Pittman is Romeo Doubs. They have the tight end and Warner Kraft. And then it's kind of the rest of them, like Adonai Mitchell is Christian Watson, or Alec Pierce is Christian Watson, and Adonai's Matthew Golden, stuff like that. To where if that's not a good thing for Jaden Reed, and of course Jaden Reed seems to be the best wide receiver still on the Packers right now, Josh Downs, I'm not necessarily sure if he is better than Michael Pittman, and Michael Pittman is certainly better than Romeo Doubs in this form of an offense. So I am a little bit worried that Josh Downs, playing in really only 3 wide receiver sets, is going to limit his floor and his ceiling, to where I'd probably end up just sitting him a little bit more to start the year and leaning more in towards Michael Pittman being more of the go-to guy for Daniel Jones, which sucks. I did believe in Josh Downs too. Obviously coming out of North Carolina, and then the past couple of years, I was buying into Josh Downs for Dynasty, but if his role isn't going to expand, that's tough from a fantasy football perspective. It adds to inconsistencies, disappointment, all that kind of stuff, to where he's one of the perfect wide receivers that when I preach all the time about saying trade up, do 2-for-1s and 3-for-1s at the wide receiver position, Josh Downs is one of those guys that is perfect to trade away, because you can find he's valuable enough to where other people will want to trade for him, and he's valuable enough to where it should be relatively easy to vault up from him to a more meaningful wide receiver. Then you can easily find replacement production for Josh Downs. Like if you traded Josh Downs and Devonta Smith and you got to a Rashee Rice or a T. Higgins or somebody like that, Then you can just go buy use your second round pick, go buy Michael Pittman. Yeah, it's probably a better roster in totality having T. Higgins and Michael Pittman than it is having Devonta Smith and Josh Downs. You know what I mean? So if you're, I'm not saying that you can do that stuff specifically. Those are just the first names that came to my head, but that's the type of stuff that I want to be trying to doing at the wide receiver position for Dynasty Fantasy Football, and why I think Josh Downs in this game, as well as his other body of work, just indicates that he's just not going to be a true difference-making type of wide receiver, and might be a little bit more of a headache than helpful for your roster that you might want to sell. Vegas at New England. Then from a Vegas standpoint, everybody was pretty good. Like this offense is basically the same as what it was last year, to where I was just like, you have Brock Bowers, you have Jacoby Myers, you're good to go. That was pretty much it. Geno looked pretty good. 360 yards and a touchdown, 10 yards per attempt. That's pretty great. Ashton Genty, you would like to see, the volume is there. It's very much still like an Omarion Hampton thing, to where the volume is there with 21 total touches. Didn't have the efficiency. That could be a New England defense thing. That could be a little bit of the Raiders offense, and just kind of how this game went. It was a little bit weathery as well. It was a weird game overall for rushing, I guess, just in totality. He did score, so that's good. So at least from a fantasy standpoint, he got over double digits because of the touchdown. Not concerned about Ashton Genty. It was his first official NFL game. And then if you have Bowers, you have Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers. There's your offense. Trey Tucker got the long touchdown. That's probably what we're going to come to expect from him. Deontay Thornton had a big play as well. Probably what you're going to come to expect from him as well. Besh wasn't really used. Michael Mayer, I liked seeing that he had 4 for 38. And if this Brock Bowers injury, which he said he was okay, but if Bowers' injury ends up being anything even more, or if he re-aggravates it later, Mayer is a very good stash to have, just in terms of his overall talent, but as a very, very good tight end handcuff, so to speak, to the best tight end in fantasy football, Mayer could step into that Bowers role, I think, relatively easily. Not be Brock Bowers himself, but step into that role in usage for the Vegas Raiders. And they wouldn't really skip a beat all that much, I don't think. So stash Michael Mayer, pick him up off waivers if you have him. Don't drop him if you're considering dropping him for any reason. That's Vegas. From the New England side, Drake May had a decent game. It was overall not bad. I do wish that he ran more. I don't know why he only ran 4 times for 11 yards. I think that's a career low for him from all the games that he started. So there's that. Travion Ramondre, the split was very interesting in the fact that Travion had fewer carries, but obviously had 6 receptions compared to Ramondre's 2. So you love to see that. He was way more efficient as well. So I'm not worried about that from Travion versus Ramondre. Ramondre was incredibly inefficient. This is just rookies ramping up throughout the remainder of the year. So I'm not concerned at all about Travion Henderson. The main thing with the wide receiver group, Hunter Henry was pretty solid. That felt kind of relatively easy to predict that he's just going to be a decent option every single week. Nothing crazy, nothing spectacular. He might be more touchdown dependent, but the fact that you can get to 10 PPR points without scoring is pretty solid. So I think he's a solid option. If you don't really have anybody else, just continue to play Hunter Henry, and he will be sneaky every single week. Stephon Diggs, 6 for 57. That's pretty solid. The big name, Kayshon Boutte, though, 6 for 103. Man, I do wish that Kyle Williams would get more involved here. Maybe it's kind of the injuries that he had in training camp, but seeing that production out of Kayshon Boutte makes me really hopeful for Kyle Williams, because I think Kyle Williams is just a better wide receiver. But this is at least Boutte's role right now, to the point where he plays. Like I said, they play Miami this upcoming week in week 2. And Boutte's a pretty interesting name. Like I'm looking at him from like an early DFS standpoint for my DraftKings lineup. He could be a sneak. I'm not going out and buying him, but if you have him already, or if he's for some reason still on waiver wires, he's a pretty sneaky flex consideration, I think, especially with London probably out, Xavier Worthy out, Rashee Rice obviously suspended. Maybe if you're missing like a Jawan Jennings, or you weren't super enthralled by Tyreek or Waddle or anybody like that. There's a few wide receivers out there that are either actually injured and probably going to miss time to uninspiring, to where Kayshon Boutte in a plus matchup as May's 1B right now, especially with the connection that they seem to have last year. I don't know, man. I mean, he's pretty sneaky. I'm not going out and buying him. if you can get a second for him, that's an auto accept. And if you get an offer of like a third or even a couple of thirds for Boutte, I'd probably consider it really closely. But if you have him, at least for now, and nobody's interested, he's a sneaky name. I'll say that for the very least. But I do think Kyle Williams is better, and we just need to get him into that role. Get him healthy, and then get in that role. Steelers and Jets now. What a freaking game. A game that I thought was going to... This is the lowest over-under on the week, and a game that I thought was actually going to go under their over-under of like 37 points. They both almost put up the total over-under projection themselves. Holy crap, man. So I was trying to figure out if this was more of a Steelers and Jets defense thing, like both of their defenses are actually going to be a little bit worse than we initially projected, or could this be some sort of like a double revenge game where Rodgers just wanted to really dump on the Jets and then Fields really wanted to dump on the Steelers? I don't know. It could be a whole amalgam of a bunch of different things, but it was a very, very fun surprise, and it was a fun game. I wasn't actually able to watch it live. I was at a friend's birthday party. Why he chose Sunday, I have no idea. But after going back and kind of watching most of it pretty quickly, it was pretty fun to watch. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers was great. DK Metcalf, main wide receiver 1. Calvin Austin, who I mentioned in multiple videos over the offseason that if he's on your waiver wires, you should be stashing because he's probably the clear wide receiver 2. Turns out to be the clear wide receiver 2 for Aaron Rodgers right now. So if he's still on waivers, absolutely pick him up. And I'm not throwing him in my starting lineup, but he is a guy that once we get into bye weeks and as more injuries come in, that Calvin Austin could be somebody that you throw out there, not necessarily out of desperation, but he is a hopeful long shot a little bit every single week, but a guy that could do exactly what he just did this week, 4 for 70 and a touchdown with a 30-yard touchdown. So, those two guys are going to be the big names for DK Metcalf specifically, but those two are going to be the big names for Aaron Rodgers. The running backs, Caleb Johnson fumbled a kick return, so I wondered if that put him in the doghouse pretty early on. Jaylen Warren, we expected to lead the team in carries and targets, which he did. He had 13 total touches, had the receiving touchdown. But man, I really wanted more Caleb Johnson. I think this is slightly beyond the point to where it's like, okay, Travion kind of had to get worked in. That he's not Omarion Hampton, he's not Ashton Genty to get that immediate workload, but like this feels beyond that even more. To one carry and then one fumbled kick return like that. I don't know, man. Like obviously you're not playing Caleb Johnson ever, but he does feel like somebody that if you could buy for a second right now, I would probably try to do that. But he cannot be anywhere near your starting lineup, and you're just hoping and praying that something eventually goes wrong. I don't know why you're giving so much run to Kenny Gainwell. He sucks. And Jaylen Warren is not built for a massive workload. I'm surprised that they're not trying to give him more run, and I'm surprised that Rodgers isn't trying to talk up, that they need more of a run game, because only running for 50 yards is not going to cut it every single week. So it's a sad situation, but we need more from Caleb Johnson. On the Jets side of the ball, Justin Fields looked really, really good, which I did. Like I said, I wondered if that was kind of a revenge game thing. He had 2 rushing touchdowns, 50 yards, over 200 and a touchdown through the air. So pretty classic Justin Fields peak game. You know what I mean? Like this is what he can do any given week. And it's going to be interesting if he could kind of keep this momentum going. I don't think he's going to rush for 50 yards and 2 touchdowns every week, but if he can continue to look good and not have those ups and downs and whatnot, that's going to be really good for this Jets offense, and it's going to be really good for us for fantasy football with Garrett Wilson, who was 7 for 95 and a touchdown, with Breece Hall, who had almost 150 yards on 21 touches. That was phenomenal to see. I love seeing Breece Hall. Fantasy football is much better when Breece Hall is actually a good fantasy player. So I'm not buying Breece Hall yet, but again, these are things that I just want to be paying attention to with their week 1 performances, because Justin Fields could fall flat on his face again next week, and we're like, oh, it's the New York Jets. Oh, it's Justin Fields. Breece Hall looks bad. Garrett Wilson doesn't do well. Blah 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 blah. But this game at least gives you hope. This gives you the peak, a look behind the curtain into what could be if everything was kind of firing on all cylinders. So hopefully Fields and company can continue doing this, but I'm not buying or selling anybody based on this game. Giants and Commanders, there's really not much to say from a Giant standpoint. Russell Wilson is not good. Tyron Tracy was massively inefficient. Cam Scadaboo was even worse. He had -3 rushing yards. So that's pretty much it. It's Malik Neighbors. It's Wan'Dale Robinson, which I don't even think you're not even starting Wan'Dale. I mean, he is startable. I will say that, just because of the sheer amount of volume that he'll probably get. But Malik Neighbors, I think you need to readjust your confidence level in him and on your fantasy team, that until something actually changes, like until Jackson Dart gets the start or until Jameis Winston gets a start, that Malik Neighbors is more of a wide receiver 2 with wide receiver 1 upside because of the volume. If he can score, if he can get 8, 9, 10 receptions, he's just not a guy that I want to go out there and trust is really going to be someone that can get me over 14 or 15 fantasy points like on a weekly basis. Like, you're going to have games like this where he's 5 for 71 because the Giants suck and they can't get anything going. And that's just kind of what it is. It's kind of more the same from what it was last year too. So obviously we know that Malik Neighbors has that ability to break games open. So that's going to come at some point, but these games are here a lot more than I think we want to. And I think if you're a Malik Neighbors manager and have him in your starting lineup every single week, games like this are gonna pop up way more than you actually want it to. On the Washington side, Jaden Daniels, I mean, he did what he could, 230 yards and a touchdown. But when you're blowing out a division rival, it's kind of hard to just have a more mediocre game. 70 rushing yards is pretty solid. Deebo Samuel had a fantastic game. You love to see that, 7 for 77. I do think that Deebo is very startable moving forward, especially with Terry McLaurin just kind of getting reintegrated back into the offense and into football shape after sitting out all August. That was kind of predictable in terms of that McLaurin is going to have a slow start, and maybe Deebo soaks up a little bit of that. Zach Ertz gets the touchdown, so that's good for him. I think, if you don't have anybody better to start at tight end, Zach Ertz is a fine starter, which I didn't mention Theo Johnson from the Giants. I wish he gets more involved too. I would love to see Theo Johnson get more of the Wan'Dale usage, but until then, he's just on your bench and is a fun flyer. Zach Ertz is actually startable, though. Now, of course, the big thing then is Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt. He looked so good, had that 40-yard rush, which means that he was 9 for 40 on his other carries, which was still really good, had a touchdown, and then also had 1 target compared to Austin Eckler's 3. So I'm wondering if he's going to get worked in more into the passing game as we move forward. Love to see that he he did out-snap and out-rush Austin Eckler. Eckler, of course, gets used more in the receiving game. But yeah, I mean, that switch flipped pretty quickly, and it flipped pretty quickly for me in my head. I thought Austin Eckler was going to get a lot more of the work initially, and then JCM would get acclimated more and more every single week, kind of like Travion Henderson. But nah, they were just like, Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt, you get 10 carries and 11 opportunities. Austin Eckler, you get 9 carries, 9 touches, 9 opportunities. So it was pretty 50-50, but it slid more towards Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt's way, and I think that's just going to continue moving forward. I know Caleb is a big JCM fan. He mentioned him on 4 for 4 as a guy that you need to be trading for right now. And I agree with that. I would probably trade a 2nd-round pick for JCM right now in Dynasty. I think that he could be the real deal for them as kind of like a Jordan Howard, or that's not a good a Philip Lindsay, Chris Carson. They're Alfred Morris, something like that. I think JCM's more explosive than all those guys. But I was just trying to think of like late round, like 7th or undrafted free agent running backs who kind of come up as rookies. You know what I mean? I think he could be that sort of the guy, and I would pay a 2nd-round pick for JCM right now if you want some running back depth or some help on your starting lineup. As for the Panthers and the Jaguars, on the Panthers side of the ball, Bryce Young did not look good at all, which kind of sucks. Well, I'll get to that. It kind of sucks that Bryce Young didn't look good, but it is what it is. They had a delay in this game, so I'm wondering if that affected anything at all. But even before then, he didn't look all that good. Chuba, they came out and they said they didn't want to run Chuba Hubbard right into the ground, and then proceeded to give him 21 opportunities, 16 carries and 5 targets. He had that, the receiving touchdown as well, kind of at the end of the game. That was more garbage time than anything, which really helped for me for fantasy football because I have him in a lot of leagues. But I mean, this is Chuba Hubbard's backfield. If you're worried about Rico or Trevor Etienne, don't be, because it's Chuba Hubbard's backfield. And that's why I love to see it as somebody who was already in on him and confident on him in the entire offseason to then come out and have 21 opportunities in the first week. I love seeing that personally for Chuba Hubbard. Still a strong buy as an RB2. If you can get him for anything less than a first, that's a smash, in my opinion. Now, as for the receiving game, Leggett didn't do all that much. Hunter Renfrow didn't do all that much. JT Sanders, I do like to see he had 2 more targets than Tommy Tremble. So definitely keep an eye on Jatavion Sanders. He is in that Theo Johnson range of very interesting tight end flyers that you could have on your bench and see if they ultimately grow into something else. Because I really, really liked him coming out of college, out of Texas, and now has a pretty good opportunity here if he can beat out Tommy Tremble, because he had good games last year when Tommy Tremble was injured. So now if he can actually beat out a healthy Tommy Tremble, that's very good things for him, especially if this Panthers offense can get better. Now, as for Tet McMillan, his game film was tremendous. He was another player that I talked about in my 4-for-4 video for redraft, that if you just look at the box score, you see 9 targets, which is great, 5 for 68, solid, nothing special, but really solid for a rookie for his first game. But if you watch the actual film, there were 2 plays that they missed, that Bryce and Tet missed on long 30-plus yard touchdowns. The first one, Bryce actually got off, and Tet had to kind of go up and try to one-hand it. He just didn't come down with it. Usually I would expect Tet to come down with a ball kind of like that, but he just wasn't able to pull that one in, and that would have been like a 33-yard touchdown or something like that. The other one, Tet beat his defender pretty quickly within 5 or 10 yards, and then continued to run kind of like a deep post route over the middle of the field that Bryce started to cut back to throw, but then a corner blitz got him as he was throwing, and then it kind of, hit his arm, did the whole thing. So the ball never even made it close to Tet. But had he actually gotten that pass off, Tet had like 3 to 5 yards of space on that defender, wide open, that would have been like a 40 or 50-yard touchdown. So had he caught one of those passes, we would be talking about Tet McMillan in a completely different way, that he had a tremendous start to the season, to his rookie year. He's going to be untouchable from a dynasty standpoint. Had he caught both of them, oh my gosh. We'd be talking, there would be people, had he caught both those in conjunction with like Amon-Ra's stat line and Nico's stat line and AJ Brown's stat line and Brian Thomas Jr.'s stat line, that like people would be like, oh, yep, Tet McMillan, top 5 dynasty wide receiver. I could see that already right now had he caught both of those, and his stat line was more like 7 for 130 and 2. Like that would have just set the fantasy and dynasty world on fire. But because he didn't hit on either of them, we get this kind of mediocre stat line of 11 fantasy points, 5 for 68. Again, it's solid, but it's nothing special. To where if you didn't know about those 2 plays and you didn't see Tet McMillan beat that one defender deep on that one play, you would not know how good Tet McMillan's game actually was. He had the target share, the air yard share, everything was there for him. Bryce Young was locked in on looking for Tet McMillan, and he is just so freaking good. I think he's honestly a top 10 dynasty wide receiver right now. If he wasn't already, he definitely is, in my opinion. And he is definitely a must buy. If you want to get in on Tet McMillan, you need to buy him right now before his price continues to go up as the season goes on, because I really do believe that he is this year's version of Brian Thomas Jr. So AJ Brown plus, Ladd McConkey plus, maybe even get Ladd McConkey for Tet plus. How can you move from JSN to Tet McMillan? Because I think Ladd and JSN ceilings, I think, are a little limited. Tet McMillan can legitimately be a top 3 fantasy wide receiver for a very, very long time. He's that good. So that's how can you move from T. Higgins plus to Tet McMillan, Rashee Rice plus for Tet McMillan? Can you get out of the Devonta Smith, Rome Odunze, DK Metcalf, DJ Moore? Can you get out of that range, add a first to any one of those guys and go get Tet McMillan? Like that's how I view Tet McMillan for the remainder of the year and for Dynasty. He's phenomenal. On the Jaguars side, we'll start with the receiving game. Trevor Lawrence didn't look all that great. He didn't necessarily need to look good to win this game, but boy, did he actually not look all that great. People ask me if I'm concerned about Brian Thomas Jr. based on this game and the fact that Travis Hunter had more targets than him. No, again, that's another, if you watch the film, Lawrence missed BTJ on like 2 or 3 really bad passes that BTJ was wide open. And had he caught those, and we're talking about maybe like 4 for 50 or something like that, we're like, okay, not a great game, but at least he gave me something instead of 2 fantasy points. I'm not out on BTJ whatsoever. I'm not concerned at all. Just a bad game. Hopefully Trevor Lawrence picks it up here, which there might be a little bit of some more growing pains with Lawrence in this new Liam Cohen offense in legitimate games, just like there kind of was with Caleb in a new Ben Johnson offense outside of the first drive. We'll get to that soon. But not worried about BTJ. Love Travis Hunter's usage. He was used all over the field, played a lot offensively, barely played at all defensively. And so I think that he is definitely a guy that is a flex consideration that is only going to get better throughout the remainder of the year. Dimey Brown just had a couple big catches. Brenton Strain's usage was actually really strong. I really like that as well. He is somebody that was, prior to the season, I think was still kind of in the like Theo Johnson, JT Sanders, maybe a little bit higher just because we were like, okay, he's got that role. And we've seen him do well last year without Evan Ingram, and we've seen what Evan Ingram can do in this offense. So there was more confidence in him growing into being a top 10 tight end. And I think we're seeing the start of that right now. So Brenton Strange wheels up for him for sure. Now, as far as this Travis Etienne situation, of course, by now we all know that Tank Bigsby has been shipped off to Philadelphia. That was a Will Shipley injury thing, but also they believed that Bigsby can work well on special teams for them. So it was a little bit of Shipley's rib injury, but then also a little bit that they could just use Tank Bigsby. And I do think Bigsby is better than A.J. Dillon, so maybe you just kick A.J. Dillon off, and then Bigsby's more of your RB3, who's also a special teamer. So now we're moving forward with, Travis Etienne and then Bashal Tutin. And I will shout out LaQuint Allen still. Do not forget about LaQuint Allen, who did have 1 rush for 7 yards and then 1 catch for 4 yards. Bashal Tutin didn't have a single target, but he did have 3 rushes and was all right on those. I do low-key think perhaps LaQuint Allen could just be a better rookie than Bashal Tutin. I'm not sure if that's the case. I think Tutin is a better all-around player, but LaQuint Allen, with his receiving capabilities and the solid ability to run between the tackles, I do think that it is possible that he is a better player than Bashal Tutin. But that remains to be seen. But as for right now, this backfield looks like it's Travis Etienne's. Of course, this is against the Carolina Panthers defense. Play every single running back you can against the Panthers defense because, boy, do they suck at rush defense. So that's why I think Travis Etienne did so well. Of course, he had that 70-yard run, a couple big other runs. Yeah, I mean, in terms of like week 1 being really fun for previous running backs that we were really high on that now we're kind of down on, like Javonte and Breece Hall and then Travis Etienne, it was really, really fun. So I'm glad to see Travis Etienne produce. I'm not buying off of this or buying off the Tank Bigsby news just yet. I mean, if you want to pay a 2nd-round pick for Etienne, sure. But I'm not buying just yet because I do wonder if there's a little bit of that, of this production was more because it was the Panthers defense. Now, granted, the Jaguars, not that they have to play again, but like the Jaguars schedule for the remainder of the year is still not all that difficult to where they might get other similar matchups to the Carolina Panthers. But if this is Travis Etienne's backfield, that's a pretty good thing in terms of his rushing and receiving workload, especially if they can figure out more and more as the season goes on what's going on in this Liam Cohen offense. So Etienne's signal is pointing up, but I'm not necessarily buying off of all this news and production just yet. Bengals and Browns. From the Bengals side of the ball, Chase Brown is phenomenal, at least in terms of he has all of the touches. He scored the touchdown. He got another 2 catches, 23 total touches. Is Chase Brown. Continue to buy him if you can. For the rest of the team, I mean, this is the Bengals being the Bengals in week 1, right? Like, of course, they're on the road against a divisional rival that knows them very well. Bengals always historically start slow. That's just kind of what it is. I can't take anything away from this team, from this game whatsoever from the Bengals side. Maybe the one other takeaway is that Noah Fant is ahead of Mike Gesicki. So, we had Gesicki as kind of like this depth potential tight end to where when T. Higgins is out, Gesicki's usage and role increases to where he's a very startable tight end. With the presence of Noah Fant and what he was able to do on Sunday, I wonder if that's no longer the case, and now maybe that role has translated over to Fant. So that might be the only other takeaway from the Cincinnati Bengals, but I'm not going out and buying Noah Fant or buying Gesicki or anything like that. The real takeaway is buy Chase Brown, and then there will be better days ahead for every single Bengal other than that. From the Brown side of the ball, Flacco is still Joe Flacco. He's just going to chuck it everywhere, and he's going to throw a couple picks. Judy got involved. Cedric Tillman got involved. Harold Fannin, 7 for 63. So, I mean, we could be starting to see kind of a changing of the guard already. I mean, it's only week 1, but I thought that Harold Fannin's usage would have been, like, if you told me both of those tight end stat lines, one of the tight ends got 7 for 63 and the other one got 3 for 37. If you had told me that before the game and then told me to guess which tight end was which, I would have thought that David Njoku was 7 for 63 and Fannin was 3 for 37. But the fact that it was switched is a little bit interesting. So Fannin is a very interesting stash for sure. If you want to try to buy him cheap, get him as an additional player in any trades. I think that he's a pretty good option moving forward. Not as a starter. I'm still not starting Harold Fannin just yet, but like in terms of moving forward, in terms of the remainder of the year to see what he could be, and then post 2025 when David Njoku is a free agent, that could be very interesting for Harold Fannin as a very young, highly productive tight end out of college. Dylan Sampson, the other big name here, 8 for 64 through the air, so you love to see that. Wasn't all that great rushing. Jerome Ford was even worse rushing, to the point where Raheem Sanders actually got the goal line touchdown. So Quinshon Judkins, you still very much have a role. So if you were able to buy low on Quinshon, or if you just held through after drafting him in your rookie drafts, this game did not hurt his role or usage at all. Outside of what we probably already knew, that he wasn't going to be heavily involved in the receiving game. We thought that, obviously we saw Nick Chubb not being involved in the receiving game through his prime. And Quinshon Judkins wasn't used as a receiver really much in college. So we kind of figured that wasn't going to really be his role. And I think that Dylan Sampson's performance solidified that he is more of the receiver. And then, he's like kind of like Kareem Hunt. And then Judkins can be like Nick Chubb from like 4 or 5 years ago on the Browns, like that Baker era or whatever. So Dylan Sampson's is still a very good stash. Obviously, if he can do stuff like this when Quinshon Judkins isn't there, that's phenomenal. But even when Judkins is playing, Sampson still, I think, has weekly flex viability for the passing game and for his share of 6 to 8 rushes as well when Judkins is playing. So we'll just have to see when that actually happens. But that's the Browns-Bengals game. Falcons and Buccaneers. This is another game where there really isn't all that much to talk about just because the names are the names. Baker didn't have all that great of a game despite having 3 passing touchdowns, so that saved you from a fantasy perspective. And he had almost 40 rushing yards and led the entire Buccaneers in rushing yards. So that saved you from a fantasy perspective. I'm not really worried about that. Bucky, I'm not worried about his production, 14 for 37. I do love to see from Bucky Irving, though, that he had 4 receptions on 4 targets, which outproduced Rachaad White's 1 target. And then, of course, Bucky had the receiving touchdown. So that's the role that's kind of what we wanted to see out of Bucky, was that could he take more of the receiving game away from Rachaad White? Because that's what kept Rachaad White floating last year for fantasy. And even though Bucky was tremendous over the second half of the season on the ground, he was still ceding usage through the air to Rachaad White. So that was one of the key things that I wanted to see is, could Bucky start to pull away from White in the receiving game too? And this game definitely indicates that is probably the case. So Bucky Irving, wheels up for him there in terms of usage, even though the box score wasn't all that phenomenal for him. For fantasy, he was fine because he scored. But wheels up for him from there. Ibuka, obviously he's tremendous. If you drafted him or bought him at all in the offseason, congratulations. Everything that's happened with Emeka Ibuka over the last month is precisely why you don't care about landing spot in rookie drafts. Like I remember I had Ibuka at like 108, 109 in my rookie rankings for Superflex. And I remember people telling me that was stupid to take Ibuka that high because of the situation that he landed him behind Evans and behind Godwin, and all that kind of stuff. And I just remember just being like, nah, I don't care. I trust the talent. The situation will kind of figure itself out. I didn't expect the situation to figure itself out by week 1, but that there were avenues in all different directions for how Ibuka could be valuable. And it just happens that he's arguably the best wide receiver on the team already. And then with Chris Godwin continuing to be out, and then next year, if Mike Evans isn't on the team next year and it's Ibuka and Godwin, just like, this is why you don't care about situation in rookie drafts. You just draft for the talent and the situation will figure itself out. Because more often than not, you get situations like this. So Ibuka, phenomenal rookie pick for all that took him. And if you're able to buy him over the past week, or past month, I should say, probably a good investment. Mike Evans was still fine. Shepard is the wide receiver 3 for now with McMillan and Godwin out. So he's got that role, but not really fantasy relevant. That's the Buccaneers. For the Falcons, the rushing share between Algier and Bijan is super annoying still. The one positive is that Bijan had 6 receptions and, of course, had the 50-yard touchdown. So at least Bijan is winning through there because, like, as a receiver, 6 for 101, that's like a top 7 fantasy wide receiver on the week from there. So love to see that for Bijan Robinson, that he's getting all that receiving usage, especially because it seems like Michael Penix is going to be more of a high-volume passer. So if he's making dump-offs to Bijan, who can then do stuff after the catch with the ball in his hands, like score a 50-yard touchdown, love to see it. London, 15 targets, love to see that. Hopefully his shoulder or AC joint, whatever injury, isn't serious and he can get back onto the field pretty soon. Kyle Pitts, 7 for 59. I will say historically he has destroyed the Buccaneers. So I don't know if this is kind of like ETN destroyed the Panthers because the Panthers defense is that bad. That's what this is for Kyle Pitts. Or could this be indicative of maybe this is finally the season without Darnell Mooney? Now Drake London's a little banged up. Could we kind of see Kyle Pitts taking on a new form and getting back to where he was as a rookie? Finally healthy, now 3 years removed from that knee injury, contract year, like all could we, he's also like 24, 25 now. So maybe he's entering his prime. Maybe it's all that kind of stuff, like David Njoku, like Vernon Davis, like Eric Ebron to an extent, to where maybe he's starting to figure things out now that he's in his mid-20s, not his early 20s, and has a few years of experience under his belt and a new and potentially best quarterback he's ever played with in Atlanta with Michael Penix, who will actually target him. And now he has the opportunity to do some really, really good things. So again, not buying Kyle Pitts off of this game, but I'm looking for trends. I'm looking for patterns to see if maybe we could be starting to invest in players down the road, even if that means we have to pay a little bit more to have more information. I'm totally fine with that. But Kyle Pitts trend line up. And Ray O'Cloud is in my Dynasty waiver wire video earlier this week. So if London is out and Mooney continues to be out, McLeod probably falls into the wide receiver 1 role. So there is that at least. San Fran and Seattle, there's really not much to talk about here. Christian McCaffrey is Christian McCaffrey as long as he's healthy. So there's that. Ricky Pearsall looked pretty good. George Kittle is injured and has now been placed on the injured reserve. So he's out. Jake Tongas is the backup to Kittle, is the interesting name. Juwan Jennings is also hurt, but apparently his injury wasn't as bad. They expect him maybe back for week 2. Purdy threw for 277, 2-2. I mean, that's just the Niners offense right now. It's Christian McCaffrey, it's Ricky Pearsall. Without George Kittle, that's pretty much it. And there you go. Similarly for the Seahawks, Sam Darnold sucked, which pretty much like this game basically just like confirmed everything that I was very concerned about for Seattle, was that Sam Darnold was just going to be bad. My translation for that, though, meant that probably means that he's going to drag JSN down. But what I did not expect was that JSN would account for literally 50% of his completions and like 80% of his yards. So, it makes sense. Like, JSN is by far the only player that you want to throw to on this team. Cooper Kupp does not matter. The tight ends don't seem to matter at this point. I really do wish that Torrey Horton would get involved. And I think he probably could moving forward. But if JSN is just going to have, a 70% dominator rating, of course he's going to be a phenomenal fantasy player. But I am a little bit worried if Darnold continues to do this, that JSN won't do that as much. 9 for 124. Though, I mean, who else is there to throw to? And JSN is really freaking good. And his next gen charts route tree, oh my gosh. Like, if I could frame that on a picture, like in a picture frame right here next to me, dude, that was beautiful, beautiful work by Kubiak in terms of how to utilize Jackson Smith and Jigba and get him the ball, because he really is their best player. Main storyline from the receiving or the rushing game: Charbonnet versus Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker is in major red flag mode. Like, we're at like DEFCON 2 right now for Kenneth Walker. He's losing his work to Zach Charbonnet. Thankfully, he's still the main receiving back, but only 3 catches for 4 yards. Charbonnet got the touchdown. He looked better as a rusher. He's probably more trustworthy in between the tackles as well. Kenneth Walker, I think, is a major dynasty sell. And Charbonnet, while maybe not a major dynasty buy, I think is still very interesting, or just a very, very solid hold if you already bought him, anticipating something like this to where more of the workload would be shifted over towards him, or potentially he just flat out beats out Kenneth Walker. So I'm not buying Zach Charbonnet, but I think Kenneth Walker is a major dynasty sell. And if you can get off of him for like a Chuba Hubbard, or one of the rookies this year, somebody like that, I think that's a pretty smart decision. Sorry, I know this video is very long. I am trying to fly through, not fly through, but I'm quickly speeding through the rest of these last 5 games. Titans and Broncos, there's really not much to talk about here either. This one kind of sucked. Cam Ward actually looked really good. I know the box score looks awful. He had a sub 50% completion percentage and only 112 passing yards. But if you watch the all 22 film, he looked really good. His receivers did him no favors at all. He's out there throwing darts into perfect windows, to the point where I think the receivers just didn't know what to do with such perfectly placed passes. They weren't expecting the passes to be catchable or to be thrown to in such tight windows. Like, Cam Ward looked really, really good, that his receivers just did not help him whatsoever. Calvin Ridley with a 50% reception percentage. I blame that more on Calvin Ridley than I do Cam Ward. But it's at least good to know that him and Alec Ayomanor are the main wide receivers. Alec, too, had a couple nasty drops that, just help Cam Ward out, guys. Holy crap. But that's pretty much it. I mean, and Tony Pollard is going to see a whole lot of volume, and hopefully he finds the end zone more often than not, even though this Titans offense is probably not going to be all that great. But with Tyjae Spears out, this is Tony Pollard's backfield. So continue to start Tony Pollard if you need him, because he's going to get a lot of volume. And that's pretty much Tennessee. Denver, not all that much different. Bo Nix didn't look all that good. Sutton, of course, is the wide receiver 1, 6 for 61 and 1. Troy Franklin coming out as the wide receiver 2. You love to see that personally. I was a big Troy Franklin fan. And Mims was 3 for 12. So it'll be interesting to continue to monitor that split between the two. Ingram, 3 for 21, but he did leave early with an injury. So I would expect him to continue to get acclimated and used into this offense when he is healthy. Of course, the main thing, kind of like Seattle, was the split between the rookie. I guess this isn't really like Seattle. Maybe this is kind of like New England. The split between the rookie and the veteran. Dobbins, 16 for 63 and 1. Didn't look all that great up until that 19-yard touchdown that he had. Honestly, RJ Harvey looked phenomenal, dude. He is really, really good. 6 for 70 with that 50-yard run, and then had another couple extra runs that just looked really fantastic. Obviously, he didn't do much in the receiving game. Neither did J.K. Dobbins, but I think both of these backs are going to be very viable throughout the remainder of the year. Not super high ceiling, but just like solid floor kind of guys. And Dobbins is going to be a little bit more valuable as long as he's getting the lion's share of the workload. Obviously, 16 carries to 6 for him to Harvey. So as long as that's the split, it's going to be good for J.K. Dobbins. But I could see Sean Payton just continuing to look at R.J. Harvey and just being like, yeah, it's becoming harder and harder to keep him off the field. Remember, Alvin Kamara in 2017 was behind Mark Ingram and Adrian Peterson. And I remember in redraft leagues, he was on waiver wires by like week 2 or 3 or 4. But then the remainder of the year happened, and Alvin Kamara was like a top 5 fantasy running back that year. So I could see something very similar happen to RJ Harvey, to where Dobbins just continues to kind of plod along, does well enough, obviously in a good offense, scores, all that kind of stuff. But Harvey, is just harder and harder to keep him off the field. Kind of like another thing that comes to my mind is like 2020 Baltimore, where J.K. Dobbins just kind of got to the point to where you just couldn't keep him off the field, and he had a fantastic second half. That's my expectation for RJ Harvey. So if you're still looking to buy into him, now's kind of the time. You're probably going to have to pay a first for him. And he didn't lose any value based on this game because he looked so good on such limited carries. But that value is only going to get higher and higher to where, if you need to buy into him, now's kind of the time before that second half explosion. Detroit and Green Bay, another big divisional game. On the Green Bay side is really easy. Jordan Love looks pretty solid, but the receiving game just continues to be a headache for everybody involved. Dobbs, Reed, Wicks, Matthew Golden didn't do anything. Tucker Kraft got the touchdown, but only on two receptions. Like, this is going to continue being a problem for the remainder of the year. Is this receiving game, and it's going to be super frustrating and a massive headache. And we really wish that somebody would just make a name for themselves basically in this offense. Like, my hope for that before the season was Jaden Reed, and he did arguably look the best even with a foot fracture. Like, he looked really good, all things considered. A lot of people want that to be Matthew Golden, but surprise, surprise, just like he was in college, buried on a depth chart with other viable wide receivers. I mean, it's just, and he's a rookie, so you got to give him a pass a little bit. But I just don't know if anybody's really going to come out of this Packers receiving room that we actually care about, where it's just Jordan Love's going to be really good. Josh Jacobs is going to be phenomenal, and their defense is going to win games to the point where I think the Packers are a top 2 or 3 team in the NFC to actually come out and of that conference and play in the Super Bowl. Like, I'm that high on Green Bay. I expect them to win the division, and I expect them to be a heavy Super Bowl favorite once we get into the playoffs. And their team is just really good, but it's not that great for fantasy football, at least for the from the receiving standpoint. And you're gonna have to pick your games, and good luck picking those games. But there's upside there if you can nail it. I just don't know how you nail it. That's pretty much it. Detroit side, man, they looked really rough without Ben Johnson. I do think that this is a little bit of an acclimation period for them. Obviously, Jared Goff's completion percentage was really high, but he didn't really have a massive ADOT. Jahmyr Gibbs had 10 catches for 31 yards. Amon-Ra 4 for 45. Laporta 6 for 79. JMO 4 for 23. Even Montgomery had 4 receptions. Montgomery continues to lead this backfield in carries. So this is kind of my fear coming into the season, was that Gibbs' ceiling, and especially the ceiling that we saw at the end of last year, was not going to be met because they just are going to keep using David Montgomery. And while Jahmyr Gibbs, from a PPR standpoint, had 10 PPR points from receptions, he still only had 15 fantasy points. And not to say that Montgomery was any better. Montgomery had like 7. So Gibbs was obviously much better from a fantasy perspective because of the receiving game, but Monty holds Gibbs back. And if he's not going to have 20-plus point weeks on a consistent basis, I don't know how you consider him to be a top 3 or top 5 guy, essentially. Obviously, he's still an RB1 and a top 3 or 4 dynasty running back for Dynasty. But on a weekly basis, I just don't know how you still have the confidence in Jahmyr Gibbs. I mean, he can do it on any given week, he can do it. But, we saw it last year while Montgomery was healthy, and we're seeing it again now. And especially if this offense isn't going to be as good without Ben Johnson, everybody's kind of going to suffer. I think Jameson Williams is going to suffer a lot. Montgomery is going to suffer a lot because of the lack of touchdowns. And Gibbs' ceiling is going to suffer, I think, because of this offense. And maybe it drags down Amon-Ra a little bit too, and maybe Laporta's just fine because he's a tight end. But this might be the worst game the Lions have the entire season. It's entirely possible. But it also doesn't inspire a ton of confidence in the ancillary weapons outside of Gibbs' PPR value, and Amon-Ra St. Brown, and then Laporta as a tight end. Texans and Rams. The Rams offense is actually really easy. It is Puka Nacua and it is Kyron Williams. Puka is so freaking good, man. Puka is so good to the point where I'm a little bit worried about Devontae Adams' ceiling. 8 targets is great, and 4 for 51 is pretty solid for his first game as a Ram. But if Puka's just going to get everything, gosh, and I mean, he deserves everything. He is so good. I mean, obviously, Puka has injury history of his own, so there could be weeks this year where Devontae Adams is the wide receiver 1, and then he's getting kind of that volume. So I'm not saying to sell Devontae Adams, but I am I think that we're going to see kind of the wide receiver two-ness that I was talking about earlier with, Waddle and Smith and Addison and whoever, that you're going to see some inconsistencies with Devontae Adams that you did not see last year, and you especially did not see in Green Bay, because he is the wide receiver two on this team, because Puka Nacua is just that good. It's getting harder and harder to keep Puka out of the top 5 in Dynasty. Honestly, there's like 7 or 8 wide receivers that are top 5 wide receivers essentially in Dynasty. But boy, Puka might actually legitimately be a top 5 Dynasty wide receiver. He's so freaking good. If he and Stafford can stay healthy, holy crap. Obviously, Kyren continues to be a must start every single week because the offense is really good. Texans offense, boy, if you told me they didn't change offensive coordinators, I would 100% believe you, man. This offense looked so stale. I don't know how you continue to run the ball with Nick Chubb, who averaged 4.6 yards a carry, but I just don't understand why your pass rate with CJ Stroud and Nico Collins is just so low in neutral situations. I don't understand it whatsoever. And maybe it is the offensive line, but I am so terrified for this offense. Obviously Nico's going to be fine for the remainder of the year, but for Jaden Higgins, okay. Schultz, Jalen Noel, when Christian Kirk comes back, I don't know. It's really hard for me to say that Houston and CJ Stroud are going to fix themselves when this is essentially the same Houston offense that we saw all year last year. And it's so demoralizing to watch the Texans produce like this, to where I don't think I can trust anybody on this team outside of Nico Collins. And even then, there are games where Nico Collins can do this because the team just does not do well at all. I can't start CJ Stroud at all. He was a big sell for me in Dynasty. He continues to be a massive sell for me in Dynasty. I would be moving CJ Stroud over to JJ McCarthy, over to Michael Penix, over to Jordan Love, over to Baker Mayfield or Brock Purdy or Dak Prescott. I got grief in the offseason from a couple people on Twitter that was just like, you have CJ Stroud so low as outside the top 16 or 7. He's my QB 17 or 18. And I feel kind of vindicated from this performance. I mean, obviously it's just 1 week. We have 16 more to go, but gosh, this offense is so demoralizing. It sucks so badly because they should be so much better. But I don't know what it is, man. They cannot figure it out, and it really, really sucks. All right, on to the final 2 games. Obviously, this Bills-Ravens game was like manna sent from heaven. This game was so much fun to watch. Josh Allen is absolutely the truth. Lamar Jackson in and of himself is phenomenal. The Ravens team is actually really easy. Lamar is great. Derrick Henry is great. Zay Flowers is really good when they need him to be really good. And there you have it. I'm pretty close to panicking on Mark Andrews. I don't want to panic just yet because we saw this happen last year too. But without Isaiah Likely there and the fact that, it seemed like they could have used him a little bit more, but they kind of took the ball out of Lamar's hands and they kind of took the ball out of Derrick Henry's hands a little bit too. They did not play all that much just because Henry had 2 40+ yard touchdowns. So obviously drives are going to end quickly when that happens, and they just don't have as many plays. Lamar only threw the ball 19 times. 9 of them went to Zay Flowers, as they probably should. But if you have Ravens players, if you have Lamar, if you have Derrick Henry, if you have Zay Flowers there, that's pretty much it. Mark Andrews, we're going to have to kind of figure out and see what goes on. Andrews would be a guy that if you have him versus Ertz or him versus Brenton Strange or him versus Jake Ferguson or somebody like that, that's an interesting conversation to have. But if it's Andrews versus Theo Johnson or Andrews versus Cole Kmet or somebody like that, I probably continue to lean towards Andrews, even though we'll get to Cole Kmet in just a minute. But it is difficult to continue trusting him. And maybe we should have sold him in the offseason. And maybe you still have a sell window now. On the Bills side of the ball, Josh Allen is incredible. Nothing more to say there. James Cook looked pretty solid, and he got some pretty good receiving work as well, which we love to see. So if the Bills defense continues to be as bad as it was against Baltimore, against other people, kind of like how the Bengals defense was so bad or the Lions defense was so bad, and we get more games like this where Josh Allen has to throw and they have to score 30+ times, that is going to be so much fun for Buffalo Bills fantasy players. Josh Allen is so freaking good. James Cook is an every week starter. Dalton Kincaid looked pretty solid. Caught all of his targets for 50 yards and a touchdown, so you like to see that. Hopefully he can be a guy that, if you have Mark Andrews or Dalton Kincaid, I'm probably starting Dalton Kincaid every week. But I don't know. Depending on who else you have there, I still don't know if I trust Kincaid just yet. I need to see it a couple more times. Josh Palmer was pretty solid. Again, not a guy that I'm trusting to start, but should be rostered. Khalil Shakir, 6 for 64. That's pretty solid. I would start Khalil Shakir as kind of like a weekly flex option, depending on the other options that you have. Keon Coleman. Keon Coleman's legit. When I mentioned at the beginning of the video that there are a handful of guys that I would like absolutely be buying off of week 1 performances, but trying not to overreact, Keon Coleman is one of those guys. He might actually be the biggest guy for me specifically because the performance that he had Sunday night, and again, I get that Josh Allen had to throw a lot, and he threw a lot more this game than he did basically any game last year. But the fact that Keon Coleman comes out of here with like a 25% target share, a massive air yard share. He got shoestring tackled at the 9-yard line at the end of the game. The final drive where they kicked the field goal, that drive could have ended if Keon Coleman wasn't shoestring tackled on the 9, and he could have had 8 for 120 and 2, and that would have been incredible for him. So I'm buying in pretty heavily that Keon Coleman is a must-buy guy for Dynasty Fantasy Football because we saw it from weeks 4 through 8 last year. Before his injury in week 9, from weeks 4 through 8, Keon Coleman was on pace for 1,100 yards through those and 7 touchdowns through those 4 or 5 weeks. Then he got hurt. He missed 4 games. They had traded for Amari Cooper. They had Matt Collins and Curtis Samuel, and he just kind of didn't get reintegrated into the offense. But now all of those guys are basically gone. And Keon Coleman entering year 2 as pretty much the most versatile option for Josh Allen as Josh Allen's wide receiver 1. Like, man, he is a must buy for me. Like, he is somebody that I would overpay for. I don't think I would pay a first for Coleman yet. Maybe I would strongly consider it. But if you can get away with not paying a first round pick for Keon Coleman and paying multiple seconds or paying Josh Downs and something else like that's like a second plus, Coleman I think is elevating himself to being in that kind of DK Metcalf, DJ Moore. Like, I don't view much of a difference between Coleman and Rome Odunze. That's where I'll kind of leave it right now with my rankings. I got to actually dive into it and see what goes on. We'll have rankings update for Dynasty in October after kind of half the season goes through. But as of right now, I don't view much difference between Keon Coleman and Rome Odunze. So we'll leave that one where that is. Do with that as you will, which I guess that means I'm probably paying a first round pick for Keon Coleman. And the final game, Vikings and Bears. This was another really, really fun game. Unless you were a Bears fan, I'm so sorry. It must suck to be a Bears fan. But Caleb Williams looked really good for the first drive. The scripted plays, essentially, he looked really, really good and then took an absolute dump after that. I loved seeing the mobility that he have, the scramble and the playmaking ability when the pressure is up in his face. I love seeing a lot of that work, but at the same time, Caleb Williams' mechanics falter so badly when he feels that pressure in his face. I don't know if this is like PTSD from last year or that's just kind of what he is right now. But man, when he feels any sort of pressure, whether it's there or not, his mechanics suffer so badly. That air ball to DJ Moore at the end, a couple of other plays that are just so poorly timed and thrown. Like, he just looked. It's incredible how great he looks and then how bad he looks at the same time. Even on the same play, he could look so great and then so bad. From play to play, drive to drive, quarter to quarter, even in the same play itself. It's maddening, honestly. From a fantasy perspective, he looked pretty solid, 6 for 58 and 1, 200 yards and a touchdown. That last touchdown to Odunze at the end there. But man, we need him to play so much better. And I'm hoping that it's growing pains in this Ben Johnson offense to where he looked so good on that first drive to where if they can continue to do that, but then just throughout the remainder of the game, that would be really, really good for the Bears. DJ Moore was targeted a lot. Olamide Zaccheaus is actually a really sleeper name that he should be on all Dynasty rosters right now. I didn't have him in the waiver wire article just because he was already pretty heavily rostered, but I would double check him as well. And because his performance, he is like the main slot guy right now. with DJ Moore and Odunze on the outside, and Zaccheaus is the main slot position that they target a lot. And Zaccheaus is actually pretty good. That may or may not be biased because of the fact that he won me a championship last year because I lost CeeDee Lamb in week 17. So I had to play Olamide Zaccheaus, and he had and I had him with the Jaden Daniels stack because he was on the Commanders last year. So Zaccheaus had like a 25-point game, and I won my championship last year with him. So maybe there's a little bias in there. But I do think Olamide Zaccheaus is actually a really good receiver. Rome Odunze obviously led the way with 9 targets, 6 for 37, and he caught that touchdown. Swift is just a running back at this point. Monungai wasn't used all that much. DJ Moore had some versatility usage out of the backfield, which was pretty interesting. But this Bears team needs help. It needs a lot of help, and it all stems from the very top with Caleb Williams. As for this Vikings team, in the complete opposite direction, J.J. McCarthy looked phenomenal over obviously in the entire fourth quarter. He really seemed like he got adjusted into the game. Obviously, it was his first game ever as an NFL player. So from a rookie, he needed to get acclimated into the NFL, I should say. But then once he did get acclimated, essentially by the fourth quarter, dude has that dog in him. 143 and 2, then scored another rushing touchdown as well. Jefferson kind of picked up a little bit. Aaron Jones had that kind of slot fade through the middle for a touchdown as well. Hawkinson didn't get used all that much, but I think a lot of the receiving stuff will find itself more and more throughout the year as J.J. McCarthy gets more, NFL experience, because he only threw the ball 20 times. Obviously, 7 of them are going to go to Justin Jefferson. And Hawkinson was still second on the team in targets. It's just there wasn't a lot of targets to go around because they wanted to run the ball. But I think as the season goes along and McCarthy gets more and more integrated, that's just all going to solve itself. Now, as for the rushing game, Jordan Mason is beating out Aaron Jones from a rushing standpoint. Aaron Jones is going to beat him out from a receiving standpoint. That's basically the split that we kind of thought was going to happen coming into the season. And it is kind of funny how much better Jordan Mason was as a rusher than Aaron Jones. I mean, Jones still looked good on a handful of plays. Obviously, in the receiving game, he looked really good. But Mason was just a lot better on the ground. So that's kind of it's tough because if Mason is only going to have 15 carries for 68 yards and then a catch for 7 yards, that's like 7 or 8 fantasy points. That's really hard to start every single week if he's not scoring, to where Aaron Jones maybe seeding some work on the ground, but if he has the receiving upside to go along with similar touchdown upside to Jordan Mason, he seems like an easier guy to also start. But it kind of is a tough situation to where I don't know if either guy are truly somebody that you want to start every single week. Aaron Jones, I think, is a solid sell in Dynasty just because of the fact that he's losing work to Jordan Mason and because of his age. I'm not sure if you can get a second-round pick for him, but he would be a guy that I would consider that if you can get a second, I would really strongly consider selling right now just because of all the stuff from a Dynasty perspective. But I wouldn't be buying Jordan Mason either at this point just because I just don't know if the fantasy points are going to be there enough for both of them, who seem to be dividing this backfield up almost 50-50 just in terms of rushing and receiving. So that it's kind of going to be hard to start either one of them, I think, unless one of them gets hurt, which Aaron Jones also has that injury history. So maybe Mason ends up being more of the guy if Jones were to go down. So that's pretty much it. But yeah, so that is the first recap from week 1, lessons learned from week 1 as we head into week 2. I appreciate everybody. If you watched this entire video, thank you so much, because it was a very, very long video and I do apologize, but this is kind of going to be the format every single week moving forward, dropping every single Wednesday. I've had a couple people ask me about Fridays with Addison. I would think that if you're still watching this, that you are probably somebody who is interested or watched and tuned in and asked questions in the Friday stream. That's going to start next week in week 3. I have a couple of shows that I need to fill in for on 4 for 4 at the exact same time, 12 p.m. Eastern time. But that was for week 1 and then for week 2. But then week 3 on, Fridays with Addison is back. So just wanted to put that out there and make that tiny little announcement for everybody who was wondering about the streams. But appreciate everybody for hanging out. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button and everything. I appreciate all of you guys for sticking with me as we went through kind of redraft season and all that stuff. But Dynasty's still my number 1. So you guys are my number 1 for sure. And I appreciate all of the community that we've built here and all of your support for me as well. So thank you guys so much. We'll catch you in the next video. Peace.